Hi. So this video is my argument for why I believe the ideal medium for Harry Potter is 2D animation, aka traditional animation. During this video, I am going to be putting up a lot of images and footage for you to see while I talk, and that is simply to help your imagination along in being able to visualize Harry Potter in a 2D world. Just some quick definitions real fast to make sure we're all on the same page. 2D animation is when each frame is drawn by hand, whether on paper or in the computer, and then the cells are colored in. 3D animation is when you have created a model, rigged it up, and then you manipulate it in a computer in a 3D space, kind of like a puppet. And then live action, of course, as we all know, is using a camera and capturing real-life people in the real-life world. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. The first one I'm going to talk about is probably the most obvious, and that is if you are drawing everything by hand and creating it, you would be able to make everything look like their book descriptions. People and creatures and animals, you would be able to make them look how they're actually supposed to look. Like with the main trio, Ron is described as being tall, thin, gangling with freckles, big hands and feet, and a long nose. Hermione is supposed to have bushy brown hair and brown eyes with buck teeth. And Harry can have his untidy black hair and his bright green eyes. You wouldn't have to worry about casting someone who has those features or might be allergic to contacts or something like that. And then other characters such as Voldemort, who have very inhuman characteristics, you would be able to do that. He is supposed to have a skull-like face and snake-like slits for nostrils and red eyes. Hagrid could easily be the right size that he's supposed to be. In the live-action movies, they had to use a whole bunch of little cinema tricks to make him look the right size, forced perspective, giant doubles with fake faces to try and make that work. They wouldn't have to do any of that, and they could have him be the right size and scale all the time, with the ability to act all the time. Umbridge has a very unique description. She could actually look like a toad without offending an actress trying to play the part. And one of my favorite descriptions in the book is from Mad-Eye Moody. It says, his face looked as though it had been carved out of weathered wood by someone who had only the vaguest idea of what human faces are supposed to look like and was not too skilled with a chisel. That is such an awesome description, and I would love to see that realized on screen and them not having to try to work around a real person. They could just make that happen. Another bonus to having them hand-drawn would be when there's time jumping going on. Because in these stories there's a whole lot of flashbacks and time changing and people's appearance changing as well. And you would be able to do that very easily and be able to keep characteristics that you're able to draw and make them very cohesive. I just think that could be very helpful when you're able to draw it. So that is the first and most obvious thing I think people would think about, is that you would be able to make everything actually look like its book descriptions. My second point is that this is a world of magic, and because of that, there are a lot of things that on screen might come across as looking a little bit unbelievable or like cheesy. And when something is live action with the aid of CGI, your brain actually has to do a bunch of extra work to make you believe that. You know what the real world looks like. You know what real people look like. And so when they put in CGI stuff, you want to believe that that is part of the story, and your brain has to do a little bit of extra work in the back to help you suspend your disbelief. Like when there is a room with people and then like other species or creatures or animals, when they are all the same medium, they feel like they belong together and it's very cohesive. Your brain doesn't have to do any extra work. Things like Quirrell's head with his turban and Voldemort on the back, they could make that look really good and creepy. And things like the Sorting Hat, they could have it be way more animated and goofy and it wouldn't look weird. Another huge part of these stories that I think could benefit from being traditionally animated is things like transformations and like transfigurations, because that's a whole subject at that school. In the live action movies, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it's not so good. They pulled it off sometimes, they didn't in others. But you can see in 2D animated movies and shows just how much freedom and creativity can go into things transforming or morphing, and also things like apparating or, disappearing, reappearing, that happens all the time. With drawings, you can be really clever with your line work that just aren't possible in 3D animation or in live action. You can be so creative. So that, I think, is a big benefit that would come with having it being traditionally animated, is being able to depict things that might be hard to interpret or things that are just really magical and out of this world. Another fun thing to consider is that if it's animated, you wouldn't be limited by budget or scale or real world restrictions. Like things that take up a lot of space, like the Great Hall, Room of Requirement, Gringotts, Ministry of Magic, Diagon Alley, you wouldn't have to try to limit yourself to the size of a soundstage or whatever set you have to work on. The limit is your imagination. And another thing along these lines is I imagined Hogwarts with a lot more whimsy than they were able to do in the movies. I will give them credit. With the restrictions that they have in our physical world, they did a great job with how the staircase moves and how they were able to show the inside of the castle. But I just imagined it to be more magical and a lot more variety. From the book, there were 142 staircases at Hogwarts, wide sweeping ones, narrow rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday, some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. Then there were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely or tickled them in exactly the right place, and doors that weren't really doors at all, but solid walls just pretending. It was also very hard to remember where anything was because it all seemed to move around a lot. And so I just think that if they were able to draw it, the possibilities are endless, and I would just love to see that on screen. This next one is something that is one of the biggest things to me and that I think about all the time. And it is that if they want to be doing any crazy movements with the actors, they are restricted to rigs and harnesses and wires, and there is very limited flexibility when they are trying to use the actors in magical situations like that. Here's an example. The original animated Peter Pan movie. When he's flying around, he has so much freedom because he's not tied down to any rigs or wire work. He can switch directions immediately or go any place he wants to. And they don't have to cut. In real life, they have to be very clever with their cuts so that they can get the movement, but then get the actor's face, get to a stunt double, and then get back to the actor. And so in Harry Potter, you can see that like when they're playing Quidditch or, any other time they're spending time in the air. There's a whole lot of planning that has to go into the shots that they want to get. Nothing can be very spontaneous. Now, as time has gone on, they have become much more clever with harnesses and wire work. They have developed that quite a lot. But I don't think it will ever get to the extent in which you can do an animation where you don't have to care. Your characters can go in any direction, anytime they want, at any speed, at any pace, at any angle. It's just so much more fun and freeing and looks way more dynamic on screen, in my opinion. And a huge thing that you wouldn't have to worry about is the safety of your actors. You could have them be doing super risky things and not having to worry about using a digital double or a stunt double, in which cases you're not able to get in super close or get the performances of your actors that you want. You would be able to keep your camera close on their faces and not have to worry about the safety of actors. I think that stakes can be raised and it can be way more interesting to watch when it is hand-drawn. So this specific thing is just something that I think about a lot. How in our real world you are limited by physics and gravity, and how if you're doing these Harry Potter, these magical things in 2D, it would just feel so much more organic and freeing, and I just think that the magical world could look so good in 2D. So this next one is something that you might not immediately think about by doing Harry Potter animated, but I actually think it would be one of the biggest benefits. And it is the idea of having to deal with child actors and some of the problems I think it might solve by having voice actors instead of actors on screen. Like having kids on set, there are like child labor laws.
When you're working with children, you have them for 9.5 hours a day. It's 3 hours for education, an hour for lunch, 15-minute breaks every hour. So ultimately you end up shooting scenes with children for around 4 hours a day. That's not very much. And it necessarily means that our schedule is longer.
And also, when you cast someone to play a specific part, you immediately put a face to the name. And that person suddenly has a lot of pressure on them. Instead of it being a cartoon where it is a lot more ambiguous and people aren't associating it with a specific person per se, I feel like that would take a lot of pressure off of the actor. I have heard Dan, Rupert, and Emma talk about how much pressure was on them and how all of them at some point even considered leaving the franchise because of that pressure and the commitment that they were expected to do. And when it's a voice actor, heck, you could switch them out. You wouldn't have to just stick with one actor for all 7 or 8 movies, or however many series if it's a TV show. You could switch out voice actors. It happens all the time. Like an example is in Finding Nemo and Finding Dory. It's a different actor who plays Nemo in those 2 movies. And you don't really think about it. Or, like, more relevantly to Harry Potter, in Sword of the Stone, they had 2 different boys do the voice of Arthur because one of them grew up and his voice changed, and so they had to get another kid during the making of that movie, which also applies to Harry Potter because they could take as long as they wanted instead of having to cram it all into 7 years or whatever to make sure that they grow up at the pace of the characters and their voice changing and all that jazz. They could spread it out if they wanted to, if they're going to be changing actors. I feel like it would take a lot of pressure off of the cast, the young cast especially. Well, and the older cast, because, you know, Dumbledore's an older character. What if the person playing him dies? You wouldn't have a face to the name and, you know, having 2 different characters that there's contention over of how they look different and act different, you know, something like that, hypothetically. You would be able to keep the same visual character and just change out the voices. I think that's such a good solution. And, staying on the subject of actors, I feel like you wouldn't have to worry about the performance that you're getting from them. I can't even imagine how hard it is for actors who have to react to nothing or just very simple props standing in for special effects things that are going to be added in later and trying to give a good performance off of that. Let's take a look at the Pixies from Chamber of Secrets. In the live action, you can see how these kids are struggling to give a good performance, how they're interacting with nothing being there. But if it's animated, you don't have to worry about that. The Pixies could actually be touching and tugging and reacting genuinely to the interactions going on. And with the house elves, Dobby, Winky, Creature, in live action, everything has to be very controlled. You can tell there is either a lack of contact or a very controlled contact. You see it with them, but also all sorts of other objects, magic, and creatures. If they were all in the same medium, you could have a lot more spontaneous and raw reactions on screen. They could feel so much more natural. And there's a million examples through the Harry Potter books that I think that principle can apply to, where instead of having to think and plan through all the interactions of the characters and the magic and everything, it could be real interactions, and I think that would benefit the story so much. Now, let's get a little bit more serious for a while here. The story of Harry Potter, especially in the later part of the story, gets pretty dark and has some very mature themes. And I believe a lot of those things could be depicted and presented much better in 2D animated form. Which is why animated movies are probably more associated with kids, is because it does make things more palatable for children. Even though I agree with Brad Bird when he said that animation is not a genre, it is an art form and can do any genre. So animation isn't a kid genre, but I think often it is associated with that because it does make things easier for kids to take in. Like if movies have a certain amount of blood, if in real life you can't show that without getting a much more mature rating. But it is allowed, at least to a certain degree, in kids' movies. And in Harry Potter, there's a pretty decent amount of blood that could be in there, and they would be able to put it in there. In the live-action one, how Neville takes out Nagini, they did that weird thing where she, dissolves. I don't know if they tried to do that to, make it easier to watch so there wouldn't be blood. But if it's animated, they could actually go there. They could show that, and they could make it more accurate to the book and just make it more epic. Also, another kind of dark element that I think would be better animated is something like the Dementors. Because, first off, that is just something that is so abstract and internal. And especially the Dementor's kiss, I feel like was just ridiculous in the movie personally. How there's just a little thing that pops out of his mouth for just on its own. I just feel like that's just so weird. I think there are more chilling and effective ways they could have done that to depict that much better. Now let's just take a moment to talk about magic. Magic! J.K. Rowling has such wonderful descriptions and such a broad imagination in the range that her magic does and what it is. For some reason in the movies, a lot of the duels and magic just end up being flashes of light and things that aren't super spectacular, and they start to get very repetitive and mundane in my opinion. Or one's just, connecting over and over again. It starts to lose its impact when it just, keeps happening. Magic could be so fun to see with big things, but also small things, just the kind of practical things that you do every day. Or they could just be spontaneously doing here and there. It could just be so much fun to see that magic interwoven into their activities and in their life. But also spectacle. I feel like there's so much potential for just awesomeness with magic on screen that I personally just don't think could be accomplished with 3D animation or live action. I want to be wowed. I want to be in awe. I want to be transported to another world and experience magic that I can't experience here. And there's a freedom in traditional animation that just you can't get anywhere else. Shapes and forms and movements that you can accomplish on paper or in 2D form that you can't in any other way. It can bring out emotion and feelings in the way that lines work and movement works that is very unique to that medium, and I think could be applied to the wizarding world in a really spectacular way. So, because Harry Potter's world is so vast and creative and has magic, I think that could be executed in a beautiful way in 2D animation that would deliver a product more unique and timeless than I think we could get in any other medium. And another thing that makes animation and art unique is art style. Animation can be very stylized. And heck, Harry Potter did this itself in Deathly Hallows with the Tale of the Three Brothers. Out west here, when we think of animation, we usually think Disney and that type of art style that has very round features and the same sort of squish squash animation. But believe it or not, there's actually other people out there. And I think some of the other art styles that are out there could actually lend themselves really well to the wizarding world. DreamWorks has some good style going on that you've seen with Prince of Egypt, Road to El Dorado, and some of their other 2D animated movies. There is a great Irish studio called Cartoon Saloon, I think, that has come out with some beautiful movies. Secrets of Kells, Wolfwalkers, Songs of the Sea, that are so enchanting. And then you head out east and they've got their own styles going on there. I think there really is a lot of beauty and potential in Eastern styles that we really don't appreciate out here in the West, and they've made some beautiful stuff. But coming back to the West, there are some smaller studios that people don't really know about that have produced some great stuff, like Klaus. All the character animation in that movie is 2D, hand-drawn character work, with all of the coloring, shading being done in a computer. Anyway, all I'm trying to say is that the Harry Potter world is so spectacular and vast and creative that I think it's worth looking into different art styles to apply to it. I mean, seriously, they could apply different art styles to different parts of the story. When they do a flashback or go to a new setting or whatever, they could have different art styles. I think that could be so cool. I would love to see them explore that in an animated Harry Potter show or movie. Okay, so for this last thing I'm going to talk about, I'm going to jump into reality. Rarely, if ever, is there a project that is purely traditionally animated. For decades now, 2D animation has always had some sort of aid from computers, and even 3D animation. In the early days, in the 90s, it was usually a traditionally animated movie with a few 3D elements here and there helping it out to give it that extra spectacle. Like with Prince of Egypt, I doubt you knew that those little guys in the background, they're actually 3D. Or the chairs that they're driving on, those are 3D modeled as well. They are simply there to help aid in the 2D story. Nowadays, more modern projects have actually been 3D animated movies with the aid of hand-drawn animation, which has honestly churned out some amazing projects. Now, I think that Harry Potter really could benefit from being majority traditional animation with some help of 3D animation. There's some great examples out there of movies that were hand-drawn and have that magical element about them and that freedom, but used 3D alongside it to help enhance it and give us a product that probably wouldn't be possible without that computer aid. And so I appreciate where we have developed to technologically to merge those two art forms together. I would hope that Harry Potter would be majority traditional animation just because I believe that's where the freedom is. But then to take it to the next level and be able to accomplish a lot of the spectacular things that are in the Harry Potter world, I would hope that they would take advantage of that technology and add that in to help tell the story. So, there is my argument for why I believe the best medium for Harry Potter would be traditional 2D animation. I don't expect to have convinced you, but hopefully I gave you something to think about. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!